Welcome to Signature Required. It is intended for Tennesseans by Tennesseans.
What makes them tick? What lights their fire?
We're pulling forward people that, unless you listen to this interview, you might not know a thing about them. The heart of a Tennessean, the volunteer state, is serve, and we do so largely without self-promotion.
And these are genuine people that get up every day and want to make art, or want to educate the nations, or want to have a heart of love in a way that makes a difference.
Learn from 50 years of experience, take a nugget away, and then go share it with a friend. Justin Maierhofer, Tennessee Valley Authority Vice President for the North Region. Welcome to Signature Required.
Thank you, Spencer, and thank you, Carli, for having me this morning.
I felt like I should have given a warning to our audience that I am so intimidated by your voice and the level.
I was going to say, he has a great podcast voice. Holy moly.
Incredible. Yeah, I feel like our audience is going to enjoy hearing from you today, but you have a voice for radio for sure.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me this morning, and I'm a Georgia native, so the Southern accent comes from Carrollton, Georgia, which is where I grew up. First 18 years of my life.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Well, Justin, one of our objectives today is the overwhelming majority of our listeners don't know the first thing about energy generation. They don't know the first thing about power. So one of my primary objectives is to have people come away learning a little bit more about what TVA does, what it is, what the challenges are. But before we go into those topics, why don't you just fundamentally explain what TVA is, and then we'll go from there.
It's a great start, Spencer. So I think, and a lot of people don't know a lot about the electricity business, right? I mean, you walk into a room, you flip the light switch, and the lights come on. You plug your cell phone in to the outlet, and your cell phone charges. But a lot of people don't sit back and think, where's that electricity coming from? What's the fuel source? Is it coal? Is it nuclear? Is it hydro? Is it battery storage?
Just coming from the wall, Justin.
Just coming out of the wall, Spencer. Yeah. But TVA was founded in 1933, May 18, 1933. Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the TVA Act. We're coming up on our 92nd birthday here in a couple of months. And we work with our local power companies, 153 of them, spread across 7 states, and they serve the end-use customers, so the retail customers like the three of us. I'm a member of the Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Cooperative. We've been in existence for 92 years. We have a diverse energy mix, but TVA goes beyond just energy. We like to say we have a 3 E's mission. We're energy, environmental stewardship, and economic development. The 3 E's, if you will. We have a little bumper sticker, Spencer and Carli, that we say, we keep the lights glowing, we keep the river flowing, and we keep the valley growing. And that's that 3E mission.
That's a long bumper sticker, but I do like the message.
It is, isn't it? But one important thing about TVA is that we are public power. So we don't have shareholders, we have stakeholders. So the American public owns TVA. Those are our shareholders. So we work, every day to keep the lights on, and energy is an important part of the TVA mission, and we're public power, by the way. We're not an investor-owned utility. We work with a lot of investor-owned utilities. We have agreements with our neighboring IOUs, as we like to say. We have things called mutual aid, and if there's a tornado or a hurricane, just what we experienced with Hurricane Helene that impacted, East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, we work with all of those utilities, and we help each other out in the power business to restore following one of those, natural disasters.
So I've been in Bitcoin mining for a number of years, and I have placements of machines that are using electricity all throughout TVA's territory. And for those that are listening and don't know what Bitcoin mining is, the simplest way to understand it is that there are a whole bunch of computers that are about the size of a shoebox, and they consume a ton of electricity powering the computer that makes the Bitcoin network run. The computer data centers have servers that verify that each of us are who we say we are. So to that end, there are moments in time where we will receive outreach from our power companies to say, we need you to turn off the machines for this 6-hour period of time. And so is that some of the shaving of the peaks that you're talking about, is that you work with some industrial suppliers that can plan their schedule around it? And sometimes there's actually compensation that can flow that direction to say, we're going to pay you for your willingness to participate in this kind of load buffering picture.
You framed it up very nicely there, Spencer. And by the way, I've enjoyed my experience of going to Bitcoin Park here in Nashville.
Just 15 minutes up the road.
Been there 3 or 4 times, and and then over the last, say, year or two, I've really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about the Bitcoin industry and data centers. Quite frankly, we're experiencing what I would call a proliferation of data centers throughout the Tennessee Valley, and and really across the country, I think. And one of the most important things I've heard my CEO, Jeff Lyash, communicate to people in that industry at Bitcoin Park is that we need to better understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And load shaping, demand response, ways to make what Bitcoin miners do more energy efficient. We're putting about $1.5 billion into energy efficiency and demand response. So in order to provide the electricity system of the future, and we're building generation, we're committing about $16 billion over the next several years into our generation mix, and a lot of it is because of that industry and data centers. But I think a key point there is that, a chat GPT and AI data search, it requires about 3 times the amount of electricity as like a Google search
Wow.
does.
Incredible.
I have a question, because compared to other states that are heavily invested in wind and other things, TVA has focused on nuclear, hydro, solar. Can you talk to me a little bit about the energy mix that you guys are working with?
We have an energy mix of here's how it's broken down. It's a very diverse energy mix, which I think when you think about energy, we always like to say energy security is national security. We serve some national security assets here in the Tennessee Valley, very important assets to our country. TVA is about 40% nuclear. We're about 30 to 35% gas. And then we're probably about 15% coal. And then depending on how much rain we get, we're about 10 to 15% hydro. So we've got a diverse energy mix. Where we're going now is we've got about 5,500 megawatts of generation, either under construction or waiting environmental permits to continue with construction, or to begin construction, I should say. A lot of that is gas right now. We are also building a lot of solar. We've got about 4,000 megawatts of solar in the pipeline. We're trying to go to 10,000 megawatts of solar by 2035. So we're very, very bullish on solar. TVA also holds the only early site permit for the Clinch River site, which is over in East Tennessee. We just applied for an $800 million grant with the United States Department of Energy, with a lot of global partners who are also interested in advanced nuclear.
What I think is interesting, some people have probably heard of an SMR, a small modular reactor, but a lot probably haven't. And there's a lot of fear around nuclear energy because immediately everybody goes to Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island and Fukushima, all of the places that have seen disasters that either in our lifetime or closely around it. And it creates a lot of hesitation of saying, well, I don't want that anywhere near my state. But what a lot of people don't understand is, like, our military, our Navy, are running these SMRs on their ships and have been doing so for a long time. Like, nuclear is something we really understand how to harness. And so, can you talk a little bit about the intersection of just impossible levels of regulation versus having the education necessary to push past it? Because I imagine that's a huge part of your role, trying to say, hey, we need more power. We have one of the only sites in America at Clinch River here in Tennessee that can build one of these facilities, but we can't seem to get it going. So can you just address that some?
Sure. And Spencer, it's an issue that we deal with regularly at TVA. You know, one of my team's roles is to work with local communities really across Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, but also up in Kentucky, to not make people feel good about the power generation that may be in their community, but to be a good corporate citizen, a good corporate neighbor. You know, one of the things that we talk about all the time is that TVA employees live and work and are raising our families right next door to a lot of folks in these communities. I have 3 children. You know, my wife and I have 3 children, and it's very important that, you know, clean, reliable, safe energy is an important part of who we are at TVA and what we're advancing. I mean, we do believe that a strong economy, the backbone of a strong economy is the reliability, the resiliency, and the safety of the electrical system. One of the things that we often hear is not in my backyard.
Justin, one of the misconceptions again about energy is that renewable energy requires more money in order to create than really the output that you get from it. In that, other words, it has to be subsidized in order for it to make sense. So one of the objectives that you talked about earlier is that solar, you're wanting to expand from, I think you said 4,000 megawatts to 10,000 megawatts by 2035. Can you talk a little bit about whether that is a valid theory to say it's important that we do it, but we're just going to have to pay for it and it just is what it is? Or is that wrong to say it used to be that way, but where we're at today, these things are actually a net positive for our energy grid?
Yeah. So, you know, I always like to say we're agnostic when it comes to the energy. What is the fuel source? TVA, we tend to think, you know, we really need everything.
Okay.
In our generation mix. The way we think about it, though, is take an economic dispatch stack, and at the top of that stack is hydro. That's your cheapest fuel, because think about like the rainfall. Okay. So hydro is your cheapest. Your next is probably going to be nuclear.
Interesting.
Nuclear construction costs are generally higher than most other fuel sources. But once nuclear begins running, you know, one of our nuclear plants right now is about to go into an outage, but it has almost run for 700 days.
Wow. Planned outage.
Planned outage.
Always
Planned
important
outage.
to mention related
Planned
to nuclear.
outage.
That's right.
Exactly,
Little
Spencer. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And then you have, you know, gas, and then you have solar. And solar, you know, one of the reasons TVA has really gone into, you know, pretty hard on solar and is we're working with communities to build more solar, is because a lot of companies who have come to the Tennessee Valley have worked with TVA and the local power companies to have a cleaner energy source. So think about some of the, you know, companies like LG Chem. You know, they're a good example of, hey, we're going to come to the Valley, we're going to create a lot of jobs, but we would like a cleaner, renewable energy source. So you go in the direction of solar in that case.
Okay.
Okay, I have to ask a question because we keep talking about the mix and all these different options. Why is it important to have a mix? Why wouldn't you just say, we're going to be the expert at X and all we're going to do is X and it's clean and efficient and we're going to do it? Why do you like to have it broken up by percentage.
So, Carly, I would say, because it's like your financial portfolio, there's some similarities there, right? You de-risk. If you're all in on gas and you're 100% gas and the price of gas goes north, then you're going to be paying a little bit more on your electricity bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a hedge against risk for us at TVA to make sure. And the other thing too, Carly, is nuclear, as an example, will run 24/7, 365. It's what we call baseload energy. And then you have the intermediate, which can be gas. And then you have your peaking sources, and for events like that January cold day, we needed everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we even bought some electricity off the market through agreements that we have with neighboring utilities. We don't always like to do that because you pay a little bit more.
That makes sense.
Because that costs you, our ratepayers, money.
Yeah, that really helps explain that well, because like nuclear is a great base level of the pyramid, but it sounds like, if I'm interpreting it correctly, you can't really just peak the output and say, well, we're going to run it twice as intensely today for a lot of different
that
reasons.
Might be what people are afraid of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
instead, like gas, it sounds like you might be able to turn on or off more quickly versus, turning off a nuclear reactor is not at all what you would label as efficient.
That's exactly right, Spencer, because turning off a nuclear reactor gets really expensive.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. I want to take you in a little bit of a different direction. This is just a personal curiosity for me. It is amazing to me, driving across the state of Tennessee, how many transformer stations, is that what you call them? Like
substations?
Substations, okay. Mm-hmm. That substations that look incredibly vital for our energy generation that are just right out in the open. And I think it's amazing that we live in a country that is so secure, that is so safe, that we don't deal with a lot of major internal threat, but it's safe to think about in the future that we might, and that people that have negative intentions for our country might view those as what the military would call soft targets. Can you spend a little bit of time, because earlier you talked about how, security is energy and energy is security. How does TVA think about some of those targets? And maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on the role that any one plays, but could you just talk a little bit about it? Because I just worry about that as an individual as I drive across the state.
I'm glad you worry about that, Spencer. I know, it's good.
It feels dangerous to me, yeah.
Right. No, physical security of our system is very important. We have a number of key assets sprinkled throughout the Tennessee Valley, substations. We have a TVA police force, and it's their job at TVA to patrol, to ensure that our system is secure. We have, cameras in some of those stations that you were speaking about, Spencer, to make sure that those assets are secure and safe. We also, this probably won't surprise you, but from a cybersecurity perspective, we're under constant attacks from nation states at TVA, because as you both might expect, taking down the electrical grid would cause tremendous challenges for our country, for our region. And it would really cripple the economy of the Tennessee Valley and the country. So we have robust cybersecurity.
Will you talk a little more about that? Because that's another, like you talked about roles that you've got archaeologists, you've got all these different people that it's like, okay, that makes more sense now. It's like you all do a ton of digging, and so you're going to dig up some burial sites and all kinds of things that you didn't expect. So I kind of was like, oh, that makes sense. But the cybersecurity, I had a little bit more knowledge over, of knowing that that's how the United States very effectively attacks its enemies in non-conventional physical warfare, is that they can get in through the network, and all of a sudden the power goes out and you don't know who to blame. You don't know whether it's a real thing or an attack. You're not just dealing with some nerd in their basement.
Yeah.
Right.
You're dealing with nation state actors. So talk a little bit about what resourcing and planning that you all have around that.
Yeah, and I think it's a subject of where TVA as a quasi federal government agency, this is where the relationship that we have with our federal government is unique
Okay. Yeah.
and special, Spencer, because we have communication with agencies that work on these issues every day.
Okay.
He's not going to tell you the underneath
No, I know
part.
that.
No.
But it's great to know that that's a resource because I forget that.
Absolutely.
It's because you forget that TVA being a federal agency, or at least formed through the federal capacity, does have access to the best and brightest at the CIA or the FBI or the Space Force. AI is where I was going to go next because the data center power consumption is just absolutely wild. There's a really compelling story. I don't know if you can speak anything into it, but Elon Musk out in Memphis forming that huge facility and the power challenges that they're trying to figure out there. On one hand, the city of Memphis economically is seeing some incredibly high-paying jobs, job creation, all sorts of stuff coming out of it. But at the same time, you had a city that at one point in time had a lot of excess power, all of a sudden not have enough power to where potentially some of these AI facilities are having to construct their own power plants themselves.
That's right.
I'd love it if you were able to talk any about it, but just even more broadly about how AI is impacting TVA.
Yeah, it's impacting us significantly, and we're trying to build. We have to build the electrical system of the future that's gonna, really. This is going to drive a lot of it, I think. The doubling, the tripling of our power generation. If you look at data centers generally, not a tremendous amount of jobs related to it, right? But a very, high level of capital investment. I forget the year it was, but it wasn't too long ago. We had the old, I should say the former Widows Creek coal plant down in Stevenson, Alabama, that retired. And TVA worked with the local community, and we worked with Alphabet or Google. And they actually came in and they built a $600 million data center on an old coal plant legacy site right near there. But I think it's a good example of TVA working with the local community.
Well, Justin, we probably did this in reverse order just because I was so interested in learning about all the things that you're up to. But you clearly could have chosen a lot of different career paths, but you have found yourself in your current role with TVA. So maybe just spend a little bit of time talking about your story, because I want to make sure that for someone that is such a key decision maker for the direction not only of Tennessee, but of all the 7 states that you're talking about, you have control over part of those regions. Talk to me about your journey to being here today.
Sure, Spencer. So I grew up in Carrollton, Georgia, and then I went to school down at Florida State University in Tallahassee. And after I graduated with a history degree, I had a strong interest in history and politics, and I went to Washington, and I interned for Speaker Newt Gingrich.
Okay.
And then I worked in the United States Senate for a little while for a gentleman named Paul Coverdell, and then spent several years, working in politics, and then I served in President Bush's Department of Energy back in 2001 and 2002. But I moved to Knoxville back in 2012. I was chief of staff to our CEO and really enjoyed that experience. And then TVA moved our family over here to Middle Tennessee. We live here in Brentwood and been here since 2022. What makes TVA special, I think, is our mission. We receive no federal appropriations, and yet we do things like flood control, navigation of the Tennessee River. So there's no taxpayer money that goes towards TVA for any of those responsibilities that we do. It's all ratepayer funded. So it's a huge part of who we are and what we do, and the people that I work with. I mean, just, they wake up every day and go to work to keep the lights on and rates low as feasible for folks who live in the Tennessee Valley.
So I wonder what do you think is the biggest misconception people have about TVA or the power and energy that they're getting to their home? What do you most wish that people understood?
Yeah, Carli, we hear a lot of misconception would be we're 100% hydro. A lot of people don't know about our generation mix that we've talked about today. A lot of people think we're, a lot of hydro with the Tennessee River. A lot of people think we get taxpayer funding, because we're .gov, so you clearly must get appropriations from the government. We don't. We're entirely self-financed through power revenue, through our ratepayers and local power company customers. But the other misconception, I think, Carli, is that, we are great in a crisis. We're great during restoration after a storm hits the valley. But these folks are out there every year. We've got a fleet of helicopters, and they're flying 16,500 miles of transmission lines to look for defects in those lines. And they inspect them every single year. So those folks get out there in the helicopters. They get out, outside. A little bit too dangerous for me, Spencer and Carli. I wouldn't do it. I'm kidding. They're safe. They do it safely. But they look at all the transmission lines.
Yeah, make your hands sweat.
It makes your hands sweat.
Yeah, they're flying James Bond also as part of the security portion of your
The new
staff.
James Bond,
The new
Carli's
James
probably going to come out of TVA.
I think that's 100% true.
It's interesting to hear some of the charges that have been given, even though you don't have funding. I served on the board for the Red Cross for this region of the country, and they have the exact same setup, is that they're one of the very few nonprofits that have a charter from the federal government to say you are mandated to do these things. And there is serious punishment if they do not do those things, but they get $0 in order to accomplish it. So it's like, you got to do all these things, but what's money between friends, right? You got to figure it out. And so it's interesting that in a similar capacity, you all serve in so many different ways, but you do have specific mandates that come through that doesn't necessarily come along with money to accomplish it.
That's right. And Spencer, I think about it as an integrated system. You got the power system, then you've also got the river and all the flood control. TVA estimates that we save the Tennessee Valley about $300 million a year in flood damage.
I believe that. Yeah.
Because
you all are the forward scouts. You've already got the engineers. You're seeing these things, and you point out to say, hey, this is a problem.
That's right.
And maybe you all are part of the solution, but at a minimum, it's educational to say, hey, we see this as an issue.
That's right. That's right. And, and recreation. A lot of folks like to get out on the lakes and the reservoirs in the summertime. So TVA makes sure the lake levels are well, are up so people can take advantage of that.
Justin, one way that we wrap up each of our podcasts is we give you 3 short sentences with a blank at the end and have you fill in the blank with a word or a short phrase.
It's super scary. Be very afraid.
Yeah. So all that you need to do is just reread the little prompt that I give to you and then fill in the blank with whatever you feel like completes the thought or phrase. So
gotcha.
You'll get it
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. The first one, the future of power generation looks like blank.
The future of power generation looks like resilient, reliable, affordable, and sustainable.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's key to our future, because you miss any one of those and the whole thing comes apart.
I think they all 4 work together.
Yeah. Second question. The biggest challenge facing our energy grid today is blank.
The biggest challenge facing our energy grid today is investment.
Speak more on that.
We have the ability to build and invest in the generation and transmission of this country. Do we have the will to do it?
Yeah. 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 We have the ability to do incredible things economically. It's navigating all of the different components. And it's, it's not just at the federal level, it's state level. There's all sorts of different things that are cross currents there that shift over time. Like you can be right in this place and then you can be really wrong in a different place. Okay.
That's right.
And then the last one, if Tennessee wants to remain an economic leader, we must blank.
If Tennessee wants to remain an economic leader, we must invest in the future workforce. We must invest in our infrastructure. And we got to invest in our people.
Yeah. I think that's a really important part, that businesses that are looking to move to Tennessee, one of the main reasons why they might not is whether we have the labor. They like coming here for the tax. They like coming here for the politics. They like coming here for the location. There's a ton of really compelling things about why companies are coming to Tennessee. But that labor issue is still a challenging issue. Do we have not just people? Sometimes that's the problem. During certain parts of the states, it's just not very populated. But where we do have the people, do we have the skills necessary to be able to staff the plant, staff the facility? And you're dealing with exactly that same thing, except you get to do it across 7 different states.
Yeah, having that highly skilled, trained workforce is hugely important to the success, I think, of Tennessee's future.
Justin, it's been great to have you here today. I really love getting to highlight people that are doing amazing things for Tennessee that are really behind the scenes. Like, your career has been focused on making sure that power comes out of the wall. And you know what? I think you bring a really great humility, and the heart of an educator is that it would be easy for you to be here and want to talk over the head of the audience and just say, well, you don't know about these plants, and it's because you don't care. And if you didn't have this, you don't bring that attitude at all.
It'd be a great episode.
You do some amazing things economically, and you also do a great job of teaching it. And so I appreciate having you here today to walk us through the TVA.
Thank you, Spencer. I often think that the electricity industry is, not to use a football analogy, but it's a little bit like your offensive line on the football team. Right? You have to have an offensive line to clear the path for the running back, to block the defense from hitting the quarterback so he can pass. If you don't have the offensive line, you're not going to score points. And the offensive line is not necessarily the face, if you will, of the organization, but they're hugely important. And that's what I think about the electricity industry as.
Literally and figuratively, hugely important.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And we made it full circle to a sports analogy, which just completes your voice and what it could
the
have been
sports
all
broadcasting,
along.
what could have been.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you for being with us.
Thank
Justin.
you.
Thank you both. I enjoyed it.
Justin Maierhofer, the Vice President for the Tennessee Valley Authority in the North Region. I really enjoy the conversation with people that have dedicated their lives to something that is a real niche area, where not a lot of people can talk about energy generation and really the nuts and bolts of what makes our lights turn on and our life enjoyable. But he has a command on it to such a degree that he can also teach it. And I really like that, in that not only does it just give us some comfort that the people that are keeping...
that somebody knows what's happening.
Yeah, our society on the rails, immensely competent, but on top of it, that they're willing to sit down and say, hey, listen, I know this is not everybody's cup of tea, but let me break it down for you in a way that you'll learn something from the conversation. And I think that's great. I really enjoyed talking with him.
Yeah, I think you made a point at the end that it's like kind of like package delivery. Energy isn't that sexy, right? Where when you think of energy, you think oil and gas, coal, and you're also thinking there's a lot of drama on the international stage about energy, right? And you're thinking about the ramifications. There's a lot of climate, and a lot of people talk a lot of things about energy. And I think he did a really good job saying, hey, we're not leaning too heavily on any one type of energy. We have a mix for a reason. I tried to play a little dumb there and be like, why do you have a mix? But I wanted these questions to get out because I don't think the average consumer understands that they're trying to make sure that we have solar in there, that we're trying to make sure we have hydro. And you did a really good job, too, of pulling out the conversation about nuclear energy and how there's so many misconceptions. I remember the first time you explained to me that that is what our warships, that is what our submarines work on. I have a dear friend that is a nuclear engineer on submarines, and I was thinking he was a nuclear engineer for the weapons.
Yeah.
I did not put two and two together that he was a nuclear engineer to run the mechanics of the sub.
That's right. That's the propulsion.
Right. And so thinking, gosh, if our military has done this safely for decades and decades and decades, they know how to do it. It makes us feel a little bit better that that's the type of energy that we're using, that it's clean and sustainable in that way.